Under President Obama, the United States has done something that it really has never done before in the history of the State of Israel, and that is deliberately encourage people to believe there's daylight between the United States and Israel. And tragically, at the very moment that it is making that profoundly portentous action or perception, it is also helping the region become infinitely more dangerous through toppling friendly regimes, relatively friendly regimes, and trying to appease very hostile regimes. The combined effect of which is to, I believe, put us on a course to the next horrific war in the Middle East, the next war for the survival of the Jewish state, the next war that may well prove to be cataclysmic, not just for the people immediately involved, but for many others besides. It will be seen, I believe, by history to have been unnecessary and avoidable, but for the sorts of steps, some of them presumably simply inept, but others quite deliberate, that encouraged enemies of freedom to believe this is the moment at last to try to finish the job that's been left undone by previous generations, namely driving the Jews into the sea and otherwise creating conditions under which Sharia, which animates so many of them, will prove triumphant over freedom. And that will not be good for us, not just our interests and our allies in the Middle East, but for us here at home as well. A study that we did in November of 2010 called Sharia, the Threat to America, I believe has tremendously clarified the nature of the problem that we're facing from those who adhere to this political, military, legal doctrine they call Sharia, both elsewhere around the world, but also here in the United States. What we discovered was that in addition to the jihad that Sharia commands that's being waged against us through violent means, there's also a stealthy form of jihad that is waged when it seems impracticable or possibly counterproductive to use violence. It's not that people who engage in it, notably the Muslim Brotherhood, actually refuse to use violence. It's just that they only do it when they think it will advance their purposes. A very practical approach. In the interim, in countries like the United States, what they are doing is waging what they call a civilization jihad through stealthy means, but with exactly the same purpose as those who adhere to, say, the violent kind of jihad to advance Sharia, like Al-Qaeda. Namely, the imposition worldwide of Sharia and a caliphate, a kind of theocratic form of government to rule according to it. How are they doing that inside the United States as we speak? They've built a tremendous infrastructure, the Muslim Brotherhood has, that really constitutes basically all of the prominent Muslim American organizations in the country. These are the groups that are being used to consult with the government, used by the government to engage in outreach to that Muslim American community, and that use those ties to foster the kind of disinformation, or they call it taqiyya, that is serving as a kind of mask behind which they are able to do their penetration and influence operations. The cumulative effect of which is that they are bringing Sharia into this country in a variety of ways. through our courts, through Sharia-compliant finance, through myriad concessions that are being made, everything from the local level up to the federal level, to the subordination of our civil liberties like freedom of speech to what they call Sharia blasphemy laws, all of which is having, taken together especially, a corrosive effect on our freedoms. And it is emboldening these Sharia adherent enemies to believe that they will triumph over us, that what they think God has preordained, namely the supremacy of Sharia over the entire world, is not only inevitable, but it is in prospect. And when they perceive that, according to the doctrine of Sharia, they are compelled to redouble their effort, as the Quran says, to make us feel subdued. So that's the moment we're approaching, I think, is where their redoubled effort is likely to move them from the stealthy form of jihad to the violent phase here in the United States on a scale we have not seen certainly since 9/11. I would say that there is an Islamist lobby at work because the Iranians who are not Arab are part of it, as well as those who are bankrolled by principally the Saudis and others in the Sunni areas of the Gulf. It comes in different flavors. There is the infrastructure of influence operations that have been associated with the Muslim Brotherhood, notably the Islamic Society of North America, the Muslim Students Association, the Muslim Communities Association, the Muslim Public Affairs Council, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and so on. There are also other entities that are used to promote the influence and, if you will, the lobbying aims of these Sharia adherent folks. Law firms in this country that have been put on retainer by the Saudis, for example. Public policy institutes, notably one that was created by Grover Norquist, a prominent conservative activist back in 1999, a Muslim Brotherhood front. You have media organizations that have been influenced, in some cases actually purchased by Islamists. You have universities that have taken tens of millions of dollars to have essentially their Middle East studies programs turned over to Islamists. You have politicians who have received money from individuals who are associated with these sorts of groups or interests. In short, you have quite an array of powerful institutions, organizations, and individuals in America that are promoting what is, for all intents and purposes, the enemy line. And it is helping to obscure from most of us what exactly we're up against. For example, we've done an interesting analysis that showed that when the 9/11 Commission did its analysis of what happened on that terrible day in September of 2001, that was perpetrated by 19 Sharia adherent jihadists who, in the interest of imposing their will on us, hijacked planes and killed some 3,000 of our countrymen. And not surprisingly, what you found was, if you do a simple word search in their study, the 9/11 Commission used terms like Islam, Muslim, Jihad, Muslim Brotherhood, Sharia, and the like, hundreds of times. But some of these groups, these interest groups, this lobby, if you will, the Muslim Brotherhood's fronts most especially, came forward and said, well, that gives offense to us. We think you need to find other ways to describe the problem. And basically, ever since then, successive administrations, Republican and Democratic, have eschewed those terms. So that if you look at a national intelligence strategy in 2009, for example, or the national security strategy of 2010, or even the Fort Hood massacre after action report, where again you had a Sharia adherent jihadist engaging in mass murder in America in the interests of advancing the cause of Sharia. Words like Muslim, Islam, Sharia, jihad, Muslim Brotherhood don't appear even once. Not in the Fort Hood report, interestingly enough. Even the officially approved euphemism, violent extremism, wasn't allowed to be used. So this is just one symptom of what is happening that is denying us the knowledge we need to fight a seditious program of Sharia being waged through both stealthy means and violent ones inside the United States as well as elsewhere, and we can't let that persist.